Hey Fusion family, Pastor Matt here with our weekly recap from this past Sunday. If you missed it, Pastor Zach didn't preach. I had the opportunity to share the pulpit with our church, and I want to give you a quick recap of the things we looked at. We opened up our Bibles to Exodus 14, and it's a story that everyone is familiar with. When Moses reached his staff over the Red Sea and the waters parted and the Israelites went through and the Egyptian army followed behind, and once the Israelites got to the other side, God closed the waters and defeated the Egyptian army for all time, and the nation of Israel was set free. And in chapter 15, we see the very first worship song and the very first time salvation was mentioned in Scripture. And I want to share with you some of the points that we looked at through that story this past Sunday. And the first thing that we need to recognize is that we should allow the Lord to direct our path. He had the Israelites kind of wander around in the desert for a little bit so that Pharaoh would think they were confused and to come after them. A lot of times I've thought I know the right path for my life. And whenever I've taken the path that I thought was right, inevitably it ended in failure. And that's why we should allow the Lord to direct our path, not just on a few decisions, but on every decision we make, the Lord should direct our path, just like he did for the Israelites. Now, as the Israelites were there, they looked back and they saw Pharaoh and all of his chariots and all of his horsemen and his entire army pursuing them, and how quickly the Israelites forgot. Because sometimes, this is our second point, sometimes the enemy can seem bigger than the Lord. But I will remind you that the enemy is never bigger than the Lord. They looked back and they cried out, "Moses, why'd you bring us out to the desert? Were there not enough graves in Egypt? We should have gone back to slavery. We should have gone back to bondage." But the encouragement, no matter what you're going through, never think that the enemy is bigger in your life than the Lord. Because that's what leads to point number 3, is that the Lord will always provide a way through the darkness. He will always provide a way through that darkness. You see, God then tells Moses, "Hey, stretch your arm out over the Red Sea and the waters will divide, and I will provide the way. I will bring deliverance." And they traveled through the divided waters away from the Egyptian army. And it says that God was traveling with them in the cloud and pillar of fire, and it went from in front of them and it stood behind them as a barrier, as a protection between the Egyptian army and between the Israelites. And we see how God provided that way in the midst of the darkness, that they felt the enemy was going to take them out and take them down, but God provided that way through. And that brings us to our fourth point, is that the Lord's heart is ultimately to set us free. He does not like to see his covenant people, the Israelites, and now the new covenant through what Jesus has done for us. Anyone who calls in the name of Christ is part of that new covenant. We are part of his people. He doesn't want any of us suffering in bondage. And while he freed the Israelites from the physical bondage and slavery, Jesus delivered us from the bondage of sin and death and Satan, and he no longer has any power over our lives. Just as God delivered the Israelites through, God can deliver you through anything that is holding you down, any chains that have taken over your life. God can break those, and that's what the cross accomplished for us. And then that brings us to our fifth point from this past Sunday, is that our response to salvation is threefold. We should trust, we should worship, and we should obey. Jesus died for us to rescue us out of our sin, to deliver us from bondage. And now we have a response to that salvation that God brought for us. And the first is to trust. So it's so hard to trust people these days, but we're called to trust on the Lord because he will never let you down. And another word we have in Scripture for trust is faith. We're supposed to live by faith. And another response, just like the Israelites did, they sang the very first worship song found in Scripture in Exodus chapter 15. We should be worshiping God with all of our hearts and with all of our breath and with all of our life as a praise to what God has done so greatly for us. And then the last thing is obedience, is where we should live now in obedience to the things that God has called us to. And this past Sunday, we shared how the Israelites walking through the waters is a natural representation of the supernatural in the New Testament, where they walked through the waters of baptism, where they were enslaved and in bondage on one side, and on the other, they were set free. And the New Testament teaches us about baptism, where when we stand in the waters, we're recognizing, we're identifying ourselves with Jesus, who died on that cross and then died, and we get dunked under that water, and we pass through the waters of baptism. And just as Jesus rose from the dead, we rise from that water as a symbol of God's deliverance for us. Nothing supernatural happens when you get baptized. It's just a symbol, a declaration to the community of believers that you're going to live for God for the rest of your lives. And so if you've never been baptized, we're doing baptisms here in just a couple weeks. Go online to fusionchristianchurch.com and sign up for those baptisms and live in obedience to the thing that God has called you to. Really hope to see you guys here this Sunday. Pastor Zach is back. He's celebrating his 25th wedding anniversary, so they're getting a week away and much needed rest. God bless you, and look forward to seeing you guys this